of the celebration of 60 years since the museum was opened. Before we go, Dr. Con Keller would like to take a photograph, and so if we could move in to give him a chance, he'll stand on the higher ground and we can stay down here and...
Come here, we'll correct that. Michael wants me to take a photo.
Well, yes. And also, from a road safety point of view, we'd need to keep off the road about here and back the road. So just standing there to the right. So, my name is Michael Goulding, and I'm not actually from Kilmurry. I'm from the other side of the parish, Clido, where the parish priest lives, the Church of Ireland rector lives, the important people live down there. But anyway, I lived up here for over 30 years, and I can vouch that the people from Kilmurry are very welcoming and friendly, and their achievements are all around here. As you can see, the museum, the GA pitch below, they're opening a new gym there, and they have a pitch in Cookstown, and there's great credit due to them. They helped us out with the stewarding last night and today, and also to credit to the Tidy Villages and the Village Renewal, who keep the place looking so well, and in a couple of months' time you'll see their efforts of the Christmas lights. So there's great credit due to people around here. It's a great place to live and a great place to be. So I'll just carry on there now. I'll do that. Actually, as I'm here plugging, our journal is half price today for the 60th anniversary. So anyone who wants one, there you go. That's okay, I'll walk away there now. I suppose Kilmurry probably grew around the crossroads above what is now St. Mary's Cemetery. The Butter Road from Kerry came up to Warnscourt, and now it forms part of the Warnscourt Walk. And there were 4 fairs held here every year, and one of them on the 8th of September was the Pattern Day for Cuddicontubber, the Holy Well up on the hill there behind us, which we visited, and my wife Bridget there has given talks at times, and it's a fabulous view from there and all that. So there have been many businesses here, traded here over the years. For instance, there was a small shop up there, Murty Callagher's, who he has a descendant here today that you'll have met a couple of minutes ago, Dr. Khan, and they had a shop and a slaughterhouse, and they sold meat all over the Mulstree region, and his son Jerome had a very successful butcher shop in Macroom. So in the comings and goings over the years, lots of premises have changed hands or closed down, but there's one business that has traded here for over 150 years, and that's Sheila's shop here behind me, which is some achievement. And you'd hardly see that link of trading now, even in Macroom or Bandon or Cork, even for that. And 'tis run now by Sheila, her son Michael, and her daughter-in-law Mary, and 'tis a great tradition. It's great to keep a business going that long through all kinds of difficult times and all the rest, so that's great credit due to them. Sheila, her brothers, Michael and Dermot's father, Jeremiah, he died as a young man, and their mother Anne, she was known as Babe, a lot of the older people still call it Babe's shop. She married Jerry Tuig from Macroom, and I'm sure many of you have heard of Jerry Tuig. He traded as Allied Radio, but at one point Jerry erected a mast here in 1950, and he was able to receive signal from the BBC in Wales, and that mast stood for until 1962 when RTE came online. And also, just flick over my page here. It was adjacent to the shop there at the graveyard side of it, and it was held in place. It was over 50 foot high, held in place by cables, and also above was Tommy Collins, who had the hole in the wall bar inside Macroom, and John McCall from Mashanaglass. Connell, sorry.
Tommy O'Connell.
Yeah. And Dennis Deneen, the well-known photographer from Macroom, he took photos from the top of the mast that you'll see in the museum of the village. So, like that, it was a fair landmark for a long time. Now, if you came to Kilmurry here in the late 1960s, as well as the signs outside the pubs advertising beer and Guinness and whatever, there were 2 petrol stations here at the time, and for car buffs like Bernard, they're now behind Bernard Crowley, May Murphy's and Michael Below sold a petrol called Lobitas Petrol. It was actually from Peru, and that's traded for in a fair few stations in Ireland. And Shauna sold Mex and bought her long gone, of course, and ironically there's more cars than ever on the road now, and there's no petrol available in Macroom or in Kilmurry or a lot of other small places. The third sign, which will be of interest to you, would be when the old museum opened back in 1965, a lady called Elizabeth French hand-painted a sign that hung outside of that museum, and now it hangs downstairs in the new museum. And Elizabeth was born in Scotland, and she moved here with her husband Walter in 1950, and to a farm in Harnhill. And she was involved in lots of things locally, the ICA, and she was also involved in tracing the plans for what is now the CUH in the Cork Regional Hospital. So both Walter and Elizabeth unfortunately died quite young, at 55 and 57 respectively. So it is nice to remember her today. Her sign is still existing, when the other signs have long gone. So, without further ado, what we leave here now, we go down along that wall behind the church, through St Mary's Estate. We'll be passing, you can look down to your right, you'll see the Warrenscourt Estate, now owned by the Duggan family since 1925. The estate next our terrace along there is called after Michael Galvin, who died at Lizarda, and then we'll go to St Andrews, where we hear about Lady Warren and Thomas Cotter. So we'll take her be aware of road safety and keep in to the right, and we'll walk back there and we'll
Not hearing me? No? Okay. I'm not used to microphones. You want me to hold? Can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay. Now, what I think of it, the local people very kindly opened the Church of Ireland for us today, so if anyone wants to go in and later on and have a look around, we'll probably only have a few minutes because we'll be heading back down to the village for the rest of the talk. Anyway, now I'll start here with it's a sad story really about Thomas Cotter. Tom, I believe, is buried here. His son Richard's headstone is just behind us here. Tom Cotter, he lived and farmed in Curraclough with his wife Jane and their 14-year-old son Richard. The Cotter home was amongst several houses raided by the IRA in 1919. Documented as seized were one shotgun, one Snider rifle, one revolver and a supply of ammunition for each. In late February 1921, several farmers in Curraclough, Hornhill and the surrounding area were called on by a group of uniformed men purporting to be black and tans. At each home they inquired if the occupant was aware of any IRA activity in the area. A local farmer was one of the people they called to make the inquiries, and his immediate reply was no, but he was suspicious of the identity of these men. Each of the men were unshaven, and their boots were dull compared to the meticulous shine of the RIC and military. He also noticed that the clips which secured their puttees were untied. Having received no information there, their next call was to another local, who again replied in the negative, but again instantaneously knew that these weren't genuine black and tans. When these same men knocked on Tom Cotter's door and asked him if he had seen any IRA activity, he is said to have replied, "You would have to go across the river for the shinners," an innoxious comment which was to cost him dearly. A few nights later, on the 1st of March, Tom Cotter was shot dead, and 2 days later a court of inquiry in lieu of an inquest was held at Corraclough, presumably at the Cotter residence, the purpose of which was inquiring into the death of Thomas Cotter, civilian, who died 21:30 hours on the 1st of March 1921. Having viewed the body, the Court of Inquiry proceeded to take evidence from Tom's wife Jane and their son Richard, having been sworn in. Tom's son Dick was 14 years of age when his father met such a horrific death. As with any violent death, the repercussions to the Cotter family must have been terrible. The local Protestant congregation had lived peacefully with their Catholic neighbours, and there was genuine friendship and respect amongst both denominations. When the decision was taken by individuals to execute Tom Cotter, it not only took the life of an ordinary working farmer, a husband and father, but it must have driven a wedge, even if only temporarily, between both denominations. Although the proclamation of the Irish Republic guaranteed religious liberty, the statistics prove that all denominations believed it. Not all denominations believed it. The number of Protestants and other denominations in the Free State decreased by 106,456 from 1911 to 1926. 1/4 can be attributed to the withdrawal of the British Army, the disbandment of the RIC, and the immigration of their dependents. I'll just briefly go through. A historian, Gerard Murphy, recorded that comparisons between the 1911 and 1926 census figures show that there was a 50% decrease in the Protestant community in Cork Borough and by 40% in Cork County. After the Dunmanway murders, many Protestants left West Cork. Of those who were farmers, many returned after 1923. More sold up and brought land in East and North Cork. While some Protestant families without doubt left in fear, one also had to take into consideration a natural decline between the census years of 1911 and 1926. For instance, in 1911, close to 20% of the Protestant population were over 60, which was far greater than the equivalent Catholic population. Many Protestants fought and died, of course, in the First World War. And when you take into account the burning of the big houses, the loss of jobs and personnel due to the withdrawal of the British administration, lack of people to work on the very large farms, and the reality of finding potential partners from a shrinking Protestant community, all had an adverse effect on Protestant numbers, as had deaths from influenza and related diseases. So showing the complexity of the statistics, the number of Protestant farmers actually increased between 1911 and 1926. Keane concluded that considering what happened in Ireland between 1911 and 1921, or 1926 is down here, the surprise is not how many native Protestants left, but how many returned and stayed. Thankfully, that group of Church of Irelanders who did remain and whose descendants are living in our community today, along with many newcomers, have played a vital part in healing the wrongs of a century ago, and our now shared community is all the richer because of their courage in taking that chance and sticking it out. I like to think that as we gather here today as a one people, that Thomas, Jane and their son Richard are with us in spirit. Thank you. Now, I go to the other extreme now, and I'm going to go just down here. See where the 4 crosses are here behind? We'll just, that's where all the Warren family of Warrenscourt are buried. So I will, where's my, thank you, Timmy. But I'll just give a very brief talk about Lady Warren, who I have a special interest in. Child of Phoebe Elizabeth Allen and George Morris Levers of Inchera, County Cork. Now apparently Inchera House was somewhere in Little Island, but it no longer stands. Her father was a major shareholder in a gold mining company in Australia, yielding £2 million in 1899, which was some money. She was 19 years old when she married Sir Augustus Riversdale John Blinner Hassett Warren, who was aged 35 in London in 1898, so he was almost twice her age. The ceremony was conducted by Reverend T.R. Matthews of Mividi, Crookstown, and their wedding reception was held at the Grand Hotel, Trafalgar Square. Amongst the many wedding gifts was a silver bowl from the tenants on the Warrenscourt estate and a gentleman's silver-mounted travelling bag from the friends and neighbours about Warrenscourt. There were many other gifts, from including the Earl and Countess of Bandon, Lord and Lady Fermoy, Sir Augustus Warren Sr., General Warren, Mr. and Mrs. Sherman Crawford, Mr. and Mrs. Clark Farren, and the Mrs. Beamish, presumably of the Beamish family of Delacour Villa. Much of the information I could find about Lady Warren, Warren's time in Warrenscourt was given to me by Karen Levers of Mount Levers Court, where the family have lived for close to 300 years. There is further information on Lady Warren I'm plugging the journal again, our last journal. I wrote an article on that, so there is a lot of more information on her that I think you would find very interesting, particularly about a holiday. When her husband died, her son took her on a holiday to Algiers and Tunisia on a motorbike. And it is an extraordinary story. It really is amazing. And she also come across as having a wonderful sense of humour. According to historical sources, the Levers originated in Yorkshire, where the family had been settled for almost 600 years, apparently arriving with William the Conqueror almost 1,000 years ago. Originally spelled Ivers, Lady Warren's family of origin are woven through the history of England and every English monarch from about 1194 to 1702 as claimed descendants of Robert Fitzrobert, Sheriff of Northumberland and Lord of Warkworth and Clavering, who acquired the Buckinghamshire manor of Ivor in the late 12th century, granted by Richard I in return for a knight's fee, which was in effect 40 days annual military service that they would give to him. His son John Fitzrobert, 1190-1240 of Warkworth, was one of the 25 surety barons named in Magna Carta of 1215. John's wife Ada was a sister of John the Balliol, for whom Balliol College, Oxford is named. His nephew, John Balliol, was the King of Scotland, 1252 to 1296. So Lady Warren's ancestry, it's akin to every swashbuckling film or TV series I've ever loved, which were set in medieval or late medieval times, like Robin Hood and the Three Musketeers, or the Six Wives of Henry VIII. So it's all set in those periods. Her ancestors lived that life, with family members serving as the Sheriff of Yorkshire and Sheriff of Northumberland, Governor of Newcastle upon Tyne, Sheriff of Durham, Constable of Yorkshire Castle, and Baron of Ure. The Ivor's name is associated with serving many of the kings of England, such as Richard I, Richard II, Richard III, Edward II, Edward III, Henry VI, and Henry VII, and apparently narrowly avoiding execution by Henry VIII. How they escaped that, I don't know. The Levers are associated with many historic battles, such as Agincourt, the War of the Roses, the Battle of Bosworth, and the Pilgrimage of Grace. The seventh and final Baron Ivor, like most surnames, the spelling has changed over the centuries. Went from working as a woolen draper in London to joining the Duke of Monmouth in petitioning Charles II against the Catholics, and also believed to have presented James, Duke of York, as a popish recusant. He died without issue in 1707, ending the 162 years baronetcy granted by Henry VIII, which is now extinct. Lady Warren was known to Kilmurry for just 23 years, but her lineage from her birth in 1898 stretched back at least 900 years. The Levers family still live in Mount Levers Court at 6 Mile Bridge in County Clare. Thank you. All the Warren graves, these are the Warren graves, the ones with the crosses, but it's very difficult to read it now. Very difficult to read what's on it. And Richard Cotter's is a small headstone here at the back of those trees. Thank you. So now I think we're heading back to the village, are we?
Under Henry VIII in 1542. The monks were dispersed, but continued to administer sacraments to the people. There is evidence of a mass rock in Clonmacnow. The last monk was hunted down by Cromwellian soldiers and hanged, where the shrine to Our Lady stands in the village. Mary O'Mahony will be talking about that a bit later. Cromwell soldiers built a temporary structure within the walls of the ruin for a garrison in 1642. KHAA have already done a full talk on this graveyard a couple of years ago, so this is just going to be a quick summary, because that talk took about 2 hours. If you want more information, it's available on our website or in the museum display. The graveyard does, however, provide a lasting record of the struggle for independence in this area. Notable graves include, there's a significant O'Keefe tomb and a number of additional O'Keefe graves. The O'Keefes were involved in the Williamite Wars in the 1690s and the struggle for Catholic emancipation. I'm not aware of them being directly involved in the War of Independence or the Civil War. The grave of Andrew O'Connor
Inside in the... yeah.
is here. He took part in the rebellion of 1798. The headstone has the following inscription on it: "What patriot's voice is smothered here in dust, till wait to join the chorus of the just. So one brief line on answer sad supplies, honoured, beloved and mourned, O'Connor lies. His worth, his warmth of heart, let friendship say, go seek his genius in the living day." Moving further forward into the 1800s and the White Boy uprising. The White Boys were a secret society made up mostly of farm labourers and cottiers, on whom the high rents and tithes bore particularly hard. There were attacks on the houses and coaches of landlords locally. But the particular White Boy link we have here is in the family grave of the Murphy Durrows. As I said previously, Murphy is one of the most common names on the gravestones here, but there are many branches of Murphy family. And I want to talk about John Murphy of the Durrow branch of the family and the Battle of Dreshore. On 3rd of January 1822, there was an attack by the White Boys on the house of Benjamin Sweet in Kilmichael. He was a landlord and tithe collector. However, he'd been tipped off and was ready and waiting when the White Boys attacked. At least 5 of the attackers were killed and several more injured. A further attack on Sweet was planned for the 25th of January, and the White Boys gathered on the hill of Dreshore outside Macroom. They were ambushed by the Muskerry Yeomanry. Several White Boys were killed and many more taken prisoner. The rest scattered. 15 men were put on trial and 12 sentenced to death. 4 of the men were hanged at Dreshore on 1st of March and the rest at Macroom. One of those present at Dreshore was John Murphy, who was one of the ones who scattered. He died aged 98 in 1896, and his tombstone states that he was the last survivor of the Dreshore ambush. An interesting side story is that 2 others of those who were arrested and put on trial were very young. probably 14 or 15 years of age. And the courts decided that they'd fallen under evil influence. So they were treated leniently. So they were whipped twice, and from one bridge to the next in Cork, and a year's hard labour. So that was leniency, but I suppose it was better than death. There are also several heroes of the War of Independence and the Civil War buried or commemorated here. At the gate, as you came in, there is a plaque commemorating 3 of them. Sean O'Hagerty, who took on the role of Commandant of Cork No. 1 Brigade of the IRA after Terence McSweeney died on hunger strike. Michael Galvin, who was the quartermaster of the Kilmurry Company and was shot dead at the Lisada ambush in August 1920. And William Harrington of Greenville, Kilmichael, who was killed in the battle for Limerick in the Civil War in July 1922. Within the graveyard, there are many McSweeney graves, and some of these are relatives of Terence McSweeney, the Lord Mayor of Cork who died on hunger strike in Brixton Prison in 1920. He is buried in the Republican plot in St Finbarr's Cathedral in Cork, and he was born in Cork City. But his father was born here in Kilmurry, and his grandparents and other relatives are buried here. There are many McSweeneys buried here, reflecting their long ties to the community in Kilmurry. Terence set up the local volunteers and was a regular visitor here throughout his life. Mary O'Mahony will talk about the old museum shortly, which of course was the Terence McSweeney Memorial Museum, reflecting his long association with the parish. And those of you that haven't been in, there is the exhibition in the museum reflecting the 60th anniversary of that museum. Turning now to Sean O'Hagerty. Both Sean O'Hagerty and his wife, who was a prominent member of Cumann na mBan, are buried in this graveyard. Michael, could you point out where the O'Hagerty
Sean O'Hagerty's grave is over on the far boundary wall there, on the very far over. If anyone would like to see it, we'll show it to you there later, or any of the graves.
O'Hagerty was a committed Republican and fought with Cork No. 1 Brigade throughout the War of Independence. Despite this, he did not participate actively in the Civil War, but campaigned tirelessly to try and find a way to bring the two sides together. He was a prominent member of the neutral IRA, together with Florrie O'Donoghue. He died in 1963, and his funeral was attended by Eamon de Valera, then President of Ireland, along with a huge crowd. De Valera was the first president to come to Kilmurry. We were delighted when President Michael D. Higgins came to open the new museum in 2016. Michael Galvin, who was quartermaster of the Kilmurry Company, and there's a big Galvin grave over there. I understand. Michael Galvin is buried in the large Galvin grave, but he was not buried in the graveyard until some weeks after he died. His body was buried outside the graveyard and moved several times because the funeral would have attracted reprisals, and he had a wife and 2 young children. All his brothers, except Bishop Galvin, who was in China, had to go on the run after Michael was killed. His brother Sean was also active in the IRA, and his mother and sister ran a safe house on the farm in Clothaw. The whole family would have been targets for reprisals if there had been evidence that Michael had been killed at the Lisada ambush. Once the hue and cry died down, the body was buried in the family plot, and his brothers returned home to Clothaw. Dinny the Dane Long is also buried here. He also fought at the Lisada ambush, but is better known as the scout on guard outside Long's pub in Ballinablaw when Michael Collins's convoy stopped to ask directions. He recognised Collins, and as soon as the convoy drove off, told the local IRA leadership, who were having a meeting in the pub, that Collins was en route to Bandon. The fatal shooting of Michael Collins followed. So freedom fighters and revolutionaries are well represented here. But there are also several bishops commemorated here. Bishop Galvin, who was one of the founders of the Columbans and then became Bishop of Hanyang, China, is commemorated in the Galvin grave alongside his brother Michael. Bishop Murphy of Tasmania, who was born in Crookstown, is also commemorated. There are Carlin graves, and indeed I can see that we have a Carlin representative here. of the family of Bishop Daniel Collin of Cork, who was born in Gromria, and several McSweeney priests are buried here. So we have revolutionaries, and we have the church, but there's a lighter claim to fame in this graveyard. There's a plaque commemorating Johnny Tom Gleeson, the author of the Bold Fady Quill, amongst other popular songs. His grave is not marked, but according to the Cork Examiner of the 22nd of July 1924, following the funeral mass at Rylan near his home, his body was brought here for burial. His mother was a Golden, with close links to the McSweeney family. And Johnny Tom had no family, which possibly explains why he's buried here. KHAA erected a plaque on the back of the church ruins in 1970. It was unveiled by Sean O'Riordan the year before he died. And Sean O'Riordan claims that probably the Bold Fady Quill is a better example of what should be the memorial for Irish independence, because it has both the humour of Cork people, in that Fady was not a lively, singing, drinking sportsman. He was a quiet man. Whereas there is many, many verses of Fady's exploits which did not exist outside Johnny Tom's imagination. According to the newspapers, the family plot of Ronnie Delaney, the Olympic runner, is also here. But that is subject to considerable doubt, in that most of the Ronnie Delaney's family are up the country, and there's quite a considerable degree of evidence that they've been there for a very long time. But the newspapers did claim that his family are from here. So this is just a quick guide to the graveyard to whet your appetite. There's much more information available in the museum or on our website, and a number of these people, there are articles in the journal. So thank you very much, and I'm now going to hand over.
With the film The Wind That Shakes the Valley. Some of that film was shot here at the top of the village, to the scene involving an ambush by Free State soldiers on the treaty forces. So there was the scene involved one of the Free State soldiers being shot and killed, and a bit of a skirmish, and the lads escaped out through the back of the graveyard here. The shop used was known locally as Kyo's shop, across from the graveyard over there, no longer there. And they did up the whole thing to bring it to what it would have looked like at the time. Mary Fitzgerald was married to Billy Kyo. He was an Offaly man. They had two daughters, Boyna and Ellie. Boyna married to John Crowley, a local cattle dealer, and they had one son, also John. It was their shop that many years later would be used as a location for the Civil War ambush scene from Kinloch's film, which starred Cork actor Cillian Murphy, who went on to win an Oscar in 2024. Also, in more modern times, Kilmurry Hall. It's over there. Some of the barriers are there at one stage. It was built in 1917 as a Sinn Féin volunteer hall, but was later known as Kilmurry Hall. It was just a galvanised building across there from the graveyard. Now, in rural days and in rural areas, dances were held in houses and at crossroads and the sides of mountains, like mushroom places like that. And the Catholic Church didn't like that at all. So they began to voice concern over the spread of jazz and set dancing in the 1920s and early 30s, and the impact that this would have on public morals. The government, whoever got around to the idea, introduced the Public Dance Halls Act in 1935, which meant that licenses were required to go to alpha public dancing. That started off in the 1930s. A large number of parish halls that were built at every town, parish, crossroads and everything was built to facilitate supervised dancing and events. Kilmurry Hall was used for social events during the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and into the 70s. And that was the Kilmurry Hall. Now, pub around here behind me, Joe Reagan's. This pub was owned by the Walsh family in the 1920s during the War of Independence and Civil War period. Kilmurry, the village, whilst in the Cork No. 1 Brigade, was near the border of the West Cork Brigade and was well known to the officers of both the West Cork Brigade and the Cork No. 1 Brigade. This area has a strong network of safe houses, which the West Cork Airmen on the run use on a regular basis. Major Percival of the Essex Regiment, during a sweep in the Kilmurry area during the War of Independence, searching for houses of wanted men. And if you stand just outside the door of that pub there's a big square plaque, a big square tile slab on the ground, and it is said that Major Percival stood there and declared he was going to burn the village of Kilmurry. Didn't happen. He sent the troops down the 4 roads, down here, down there, all the 4 roads, searching for wanted men. He was actually feared by the volunteers, or I'd say he was more hated than feared, and he was involved in the torture of Tom Hales and Pat Hart in Bandon in July 1920. I suppose the other time he came to prominence was when he unconditionally surrendered Singapore to the Japanese. Yeah, he's a man best forgotten. The pub is known as Joe Reagan's pub. The Reagan family were living in this pub by the end of the early 1920s or early 1930s. Joe Reagan lived in the premises all her life and ran the pub for several decades. And thank you very much. I'll hand it back to you.
We'll make our way out of the cemetery, or the graveyard cemetery, around, walk down the village on the right-hand side, and we'll pause outside the old museum. So, again, being aware of the road and the traffic and all that. So, we'll see down there.
First discussed back where we started our tour in Pack Sheehan's in Cooldove. And Pack probably knew more about the history of this place and the families than anyone, and he would have been the first person to ask if you wanted to know anything or were tracing your relations and so forth. And I also people like the archaeology department, Professor M.J. O'Kelly, if he wanted to find out anything or visit any of the archaeological sites, he would actually come out and ask Pack to accompany him. And as well as being the professor in UCC, he was also at that time the curator of Cork Public Museum, which was in 1965 only 20 years old. So the inspiration for the museum came from Brother Alan, who was from Newcestown and who taught in the O'Connell School in Dublin. And he had witnessed on his doorstep the events of 1916. And over the years, he had gathered together a lot of artefacts relating to past pupils on the history of Ireland and the story of independence. And in the early 60s, he met with Father Donal O'Mahony, who was very impressed with what he had achieved. And he wondered if something like that could be put together for Kilmurry. So, of course, they were generally forward. So in 1964 in July they called a meeting of what was then the fledgling Kilmurry Historical Society, and there was a unanimous vote that they would try their best to open a museum. So the next thing was to find a premises for it, and they were looking around. There was a few places offered, but they made an approach to Seano and Rita Galvin, who owned, that was part of their farm buildings at the time. And Seano and Rita generously said, you know, you can have it for as long as you need it. They didn't want anything for it. So then they had to
break out a new door and window onto the road and generally fix up the building to make it suitable for the collection that they had started to gather. And like at that time, you know, they had no real blueprint other than Brother Alan came down and visited Pax and kind of gave them a few pointers. But they said, look, we'll see what we can put together. And everybody, there was a wide committee of people who got involved. There was people in the Historical Society, people subscribed to the society so they'd have a bit of money to actually build things. And there was a lot of collecting. And you know, within a year, they actually opened the doors. They actually opened first in June of 1965, which was a remarkable achievement, really. And then they had the official opening in September 1965. So they wanted to do three things. They wanted, at that time, Kilmurry and Ireland was changing rapidly. I'm sure you learn about it in history in school if you haven't already. You know, rural electrification had made a difference, particularly to the lives of women, and that had come to Kilmurry from 1948, and by 1965 about 80% of rural homes nationally had got their electricity, which made a lot of difference to the work. At the same time, the policies of the Lemass government were starting to create new opportunities for work at a time when mechanisation was meaning that there was less work on the land. I think in the early years of this century, about 60-70% of people worked the land nationally of the workforce, but by between 1950 and 1965, about 30% of those had left. So there was huge change, and I guess it was also a time when the traditional way of life was changing, with, as Michael had spoken about earlier, the TV was starting to come in. There was the Reardons, the Late Late Show, things like that, and just a more outward-looking perspective in the 1960s, you know, worldwide, where there was this real feeling of change. But at the same time, you were coming up to, you know, the 50th anniversary of 1916, and the revolutionary generation in particular were kind of more conscious of the things that were passing, and the way of life was changing, the trades that were disappearing, and also just to pass on the stories of revolution and of old history to the new younger people, and just pass that information on. So anyway, they came together and they had three sections in the old museum. The first was the Antara Padder's kitchen, that was in a small room on the left, and then there was also a section on the old trades, and there was also the history of the parish. Then was the third piece, and people associated with it. And like within a year, like people were very generous, and everything was donated. And I think one of the most remarkable things about it is that when Theo Dog was looking at the museum, he said, you know, it's really unusual. Most museums are kind of set up and they're almost to a certain extent static pieces, but this museum said it's just this living thing that over the years that their successive generations have kept, you know, volunteering and supporting it, and the wider community, and you know, and also that, you know, it's a living thing. And I think it's because it's a community museum, and I think it owes a lot to the original people who kept it going for years. Mr. Sullivan and the Sheehan's, the Obuklas, the Hollands, the Howards, and all the other families, because they're just too many to mention. Because as Father Michael said last night, there's a piece that every family in this parish can pick out something that they know about or that is related to their family down at the museum today. And I think it's a great testament to the people who started it and who said, you know, this is our story, it's important, and let's tell it.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Kate. Now for Noreen.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Michael. Just a brief few words on the history of Sean's. I don't think I can add an awful lot to what people know themselves locally through the years and from hearsay, etc. But basically, on the Cork Examiner on the 28th of November 1894, W. Marsh and Sons, on behalf of Mr. John Fitzgerald of Lizarda, offered for sale by public auction on Thursday the 6th of December 1894 all his tenant rights, interest and goodwill in his very valuable old established business house situated in the most central part of Kilmurry village. Attached to the premises was an independent beer, wine and spirit licence, as well as a bakery, provision business, stabling for 6 horses, stalls for 10 cows, piggeries, coal, storehouse and a great supply of pipe water on the premises, which was very important. The auction would also include 50 acres, more or less, of prime arable land. The farm itself is conveniently situated within one mile of Duniski railway station, and Kilmurry Catholic and Protestant churches and schools are also on the lands. The buyers of this auction at the time were William and Maria Warren, who operated a successful business for the next 25 years. William died in 1902 and his wife Maria died in 1919. The business then passed to Maria's niece, Mary Ellen O'Leary, in 1921. She went on to marry Jeremiah Kelleher in 1925. Together they traded as J.T. Kelleher General Merchant until it was offered for sale again in 1961, with the purchasers being at the time Seano and Rita Galvin. Sorry, very prepared. Anyway, basically, the next part of the story was that Seano and Rita continued in business for many years. Thank you, Catherine. For many years, doing very successfully together. Seano was a character, a legend in his own right, and I don't think there's a person in any parish in the country that could compare to the man himself. Seano and Rita had 4 sons, Dennis, Colm, Edward and Sean. I've been told Seano himself was a pure rogue and a character who loved a good old banter with friends and enjoyed a good laugh. Somebody told me recently that a member of Galvin families years and years and years ago descended from Kilgarvan, which I should know about, but apparently I don't know about, being a Kilgarvan person myself. The person in Kilgarvan passed away and they were to be buried in Kilmurry. But for some strange reason, the Kilmurry journey took, instead of just your few hours or a day or so on a horse and cart, it took 4 days. And they had to stop at different destinations, which I will not divulge that information for fear of leaking any stories, regardless of how many hundred years ago it goes. But I'm sure they all had a good laugh and a good story to tell along the way. The backbone of Seano himself, of course, and I'm sorry, gentlemen, now for saying it, but behind every man there's a good woman. And Rita was just a lady, an absolute lady. She didn't take any nonsense. She didn't like frills or airs or graces. But she believed in hard work. And her favourite saying is, half the parish know, have you no homes to go to? Rita, along with other members of the community, something that Michael touched on a while ago, and Kate as well previously, community is a very special thing. As you've all spoken about, the history of community is vitally important, and thanks to the Historical Society in Kilmurry, they're keeping that tradition alive, with new members coming and going, old members passing on stories, and locals in the community and in the parish taking interest and sharing in this knowledge that should definitely be kept uplifted. Even down to things, as people have said already, the Tidy Towns Committee, different groups and clubs, even down to the people that display their beautiful flowers outside their houses. And you pass through the village and you see this and you say they take pride in their place. But it's not just taking pride in their place by displaying flowers, it's taking pride in your place by supporting each other in different clubs. A prime example would be the Kilmurry GAA. What they haven't done and supported in the community just goes beyond recognition. Now, I have to admit, being on the other side of the counter serving pints when there's a debate or a conversation about a football match or something, or you just want to keep your head down for fear you get a flake of football going up and down, because you would not want to take any sides, good, bad or indifferent, regardless of whether it is a minors, under 6 or under 16 or to the top level of football. But getting back to the story, Sean and Rita and Colm did an absolutely fantastic few years and held many a gathering, be it funerals, a fantastic wedding at one stage, which goes without saying, just brought everybody together again. Everybody just gathered, came and went, and had a great time. The games of cards, different groups, be it novelty groups or different societies through the parish. Shauna's was a place where you could gather, either if you went to the museum and you came in for a drink afterwards or a cup of tea, or if you actually did have your meeting there. I believe at one stage there was meetings held in the lower room, halfway down the hallway in the back of Shauna's. Rita passed away in January 2018, and poor old Colm, God love him, he passed away shortly afterwards. And the pub was closed for a number of years. But then there was great excitement when the rumour started flying around the parish that there was new people taking over. And better again, that it was local people taking over. Finton and Ronan opened their doors last year, and in fairness to both of them, they've made an absolutely fantastic job of keeping the place going to its old traditions. The football, obviously, the GAA, historical society, communities gathering together, having their cup of tea, having their chat. Even people coming in after a score, coming in after a drag hunt, coming in from their bingo on a Friday night. Different people, and even young people on a wet Friday evening when they want to meet in the village and they have nowhere to go. But they can come into the back of the pool room and they can have their little game of pool and their little bag of potatoes and their bottle of Coke and just have their little chat. They're doing no harm to nobody. And in fairness to Ronan and Finton, they've given those young people that opportunity to be able to socialise within reason and with supervision, obviously, to have that little bit of fun. And they're still not taking it from other people in the front bar or down in the lounge, or the ones that want to have a sneaky fag down the back when they're not supposed to. But that's what communities are about, good, bad or indifferent. That's what history is about. It's about making memories and keeping things going. And long may it last.
Thanks to all our speakers up to now. We're going to move down the village to the grotto, where Mary O'Mahony will tell us about the grotto. After the grotto, you can take a short break if you want to, and then Michael Galvin will talk about the history of church, and that will conclude in a time for anything to do with it. And if he was with us today, he'd definitely be talking on this tour. So both Anthony, his mum, and his wife Mary are great supporters of the museum. So it was nice to remember Anthony as well today. So I'll pass you over to Mary now. Thanks, Mary.
In Celtic tradition, the month of May is associated with the ancient festival of Bealtaine, which marked the beginning of the summer season. Celebrations of Bealtaine included visiting holy wells and decorating May bushes, usually a flowering hawthorn. Hawthorn, also known as whitethorn, is one of our most common native trees and is steeped in legend and folklore. In Celtic mythology, it is considered a sacred tree and is often referred to by the Irish name for a thorn, shocht. Since the 13th century, the Christian custom has been to dedicate the month of May to the Blessed Virgin. Throughout the centuries, the practices of honouring Mary during May have been especially recommended by popes. Pope Pius XII declared 1954 as a marrying year. In parishes throughout Ireland, hundreds of shrines and grottos were built by faithful parishioners. In Kilmurry Parish, 3 grottos were built, one in Carrickdonagh. Have undertaken the maintenance of the grotto as part of their duties in keeping the village tidy. In the 70 years since the grotto was first blessed, many volunteer hours have gone into maintaining the grotto by local people, all of whom have worked quietly and diligently, offering their work in devotion to Our Lady. Thank you.
Use the toilets. Renting the museum is open, and we'll go into the the Catholic Church this time to hear Michael Galvin will give us a talk on the history of the church. And Michael has written a lot of books on local history. I'm sure most of you will have heard of him. So make our way to the church, and our tour will conclude there then. Thank you very much.
With the post-famine economic recovery and what is termed the devotional revolution of the Catholic Church, spearheaded by Cardinal Paul Cullen at the Synod of Thurles in 1850. The church project, designed by Gilman and Company, Cork, in consultation with Canon James Daly, parish priest, Kilmurry, and John O'Sullivan, engineer, Underhill House, Tirageen, was assisted by Sir Augustus Warren, who granted the site on a lease of 900 years at a nominal rent of 1 shilling per annum, and Charles Beamish Duniski, who provided materials, as well as a £1,000 grant from Cork County Grand Jury Presentment Sessions. A full committee was also established comprising James Hassett Forrest, Tim Howard Belmont Mills Crookstown, William Powell Crossman, Charles Harold Corra, and Michael Foley Coomkey. The parish faithful, of course, contributed enormously from scarce resources in harsh and challenging times. The entire cost amounted to £4,000. Completed in 1860, the solemn consecration with High Mass was on Pentecost Sunday, June the 1st, 1862, with Bishop William Delaney of Cork presiding and Bishop John Dorian Belfast delivering the inaugural sermon. Designed in the classical style with nave, transept, sacristy and porches, also with distinctive round-headed arcading, supported on carved limestone iconic columns, separating the transepts from the nave. Atypical in most churches, but present here, are the exposed roof oak trusses, supported on choir limestone blocks fitted into the walls, quite unique. The principal carpenter was John Murphy Brown, who fled to America because of the Fenian activities and became highly successful in the reconstruction of Chicago following the Great Fire there of 1870. Following the main construction, the bell tower and gallery were added together with a new altar reputed to have been donated by a priest who won it in a raffle in Paris. The immediate church grounds contain some burials, as well as high walls, oak and beech trees, and downward steps from the entrance gates, as well as separate adjacent girls and boys' schools. Major changes took place post-Vatican II to the exterior, but the principal development was the repositioning of the altar, whereby the celebrant now faced the congregation. Interior improvements also included new seats, marble cladding of the altar and altar rails, as well as new floor tiling, generously installed by the Dublin family Wardenscourt. Now the parish priest who was involved in the building of the church, Canon James Daly, is interred over here under that plaque, which was customary at the time. A priest that built the church was usually interred within the church, as is the case in Clodagh, where Canon John Foley is interred left of the altar there as you go up. and he also, of course, built Kennedy. Times have indeed changed since the days of the packed parish missions, the colourful confirmation ceremonies, and of course the elaborate Corpus Christi processions, when the adoration of the Blessed Sacrament was marked by military honours, Latin hymns, and solemn benediction. So in these increasingly secular and materialistic times, we should never fail to appreciate the importance of this beautiful religious and cultural centre of our community. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mike, and to all our speakers today. I hope you enjoyed the day. And to conclude now, Noreen Parker spoke very well about Shauna's, that it was dry for a long time. We were like the half-made like O'Reilly, the fellow in the desert, and Sally O'Brien opened the pub or whatever it was. So thankfully, Ronan and Finton are serving tea and coffee above in Shauna's, so we hope you join us there, and thanks very much.